Hey, Dawn Fable here. Welcome to the Hot Flash Health Podcast, where we are bringing real life conversations with real life experts to the forefront on menopause. We are very fortunate today to have Dr. Anant Benjamori, a Harvard trained physician who has decades of experience in dealing with longevity medicine, performance based medicine, and has a very progressive approach to not only hormonal health, but we as aging individuals. He is a world-renowned speaker. He has been a chief medical officer in a number of different clinics where they have focused on very progressive diagnostic treatment, talking a lot about optimizing our health as a whole person, taking a look and really challenging some of the conversations that are being had with conventional medicine. Anant, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don, for the kind introduction. And it's great to be speaking about some of the topics related to women's health and health generally. I think we're at a very exciting moment when it comes to women's health, where I think a lot of things that have been sitting underneath the surface are now finally seeing the light of day. And we now have so many tools to help address needs. It's just an exciting time for patients. It's also an exciting time for clinicians and anyone who's looking to participate in this space and help women get the care that they so sorely need.
So first and foremost, Anand, I know it's a buzz term these days, but there's not a lot of people who know what exactly longevity medicine is. So as an expert in this space, can you help share with our listeners what longevity medicine is?
Sure. So the first thing I'll say about it is that I honestly wish we had a better term than longevity medicine, because most of the people who come to those of us who are longevity medicine practitioners actually do not want to necessarily live to 120. What people want is to feel better today. They want to get more out of life today. And secondarily, they want to continue to get more out of life as they get older. It's just a term that's gotten traction that I think we all use to describe the type of medicine we practice. But really, what it comes down to is helping people get more out of life using the tools that we have with respect to diagnostic testing and treatments. Now, concretely, the approach that we as longevity medicine practitioners take differs from the approach that most conventional doctors take. And I think there's a couple of things that are worth mentioning when it comes to this. The first is how we think about deciding what to do for you. Conventional doctors are trained predominantly, and by the way, I came up as a conventionally trained doctor. I spent tons of time doing that. And the way in which we're taught is to really focus on what I'll call population-based medicine, where we decide what to do for you based on what's worked on a large group of people. And so we do randomized controlled trials and clinical trials to arrive at decisions on what works and what doesn't. I don't want to mistake the fact that actually has served us very well for almost a century. But we're now getting to a point where we see the limitations of that model. And I think what that has to do with is the differences that we have as individuals in terms of our biology and biochemistry. And so the first thing that I think defines or differentiates a longevity medicine practitioner from a conventional medicine practitioner is the very personalized approach. We don't really practice one size fits all medicine where we wait for some institution to tell us what to do. We, of course, take into account clinical trials and research data, but we try and then frame that and personalize it for the individual. And sometimes it means that we do things that may not have been proven out in these large scale trials because we're really trying to meet the needs of the individual. And I think the other side of that is really understanding the needs and goals of the individual. Some people have higher risk tolerances than others. Some people are willing to say, hey, even if something hasn't been proven out in all these research studies, I want to try it out anyway because it means a lot to me. And I think it's our job to help people navigate that. The personalized approach is probably the thing that sets us apart most, because I think everything else flows from that, right? Like why we have a broader toolkit, why we do things that most doctors don't do has to do with the fact that we're really trying to personalize our approach to care.
And I so respect that. And here at Hot Flash Health is really focused around menopausal and women's hormonal health journey. We as women or as a society have really accepted or been trained that menopause is going to make us feel miserable in some cases. And there is really no excuse to feel miserable. Speaking from personal experience, in going to a physician and expressing concern around perimenopausal symptoms, or perhaps what I am to expect, oftentimes it's just very dismissive. And this is just menopause, and deal with it. Now is a time to really call their bluff and to start feeling fantastic during menopause, because each one of us are going to have very different experiences. And so I very much appreciate the personalized and non-conventional approach that you and other longevity and performance-based specialists are really seeking out to do. When you see a patient, I would imagine that there's several different ways or approaches to really optimize our lifespan or quality of life.
Yeah. The first thing I'll say is that it's so important to also acknowledge the importance of how women in particular have been unseen by the conventional approach to care. It has so much more tied to it than the lack of personalization. I think it also has to do to some extent with kind of a lack of curiosity and really just dismissive approaches to care. And I think this concept of just deal with it is something that's a theme not just in menopause, but in perimenopause and even in pregnancy and so many other things. You just got to deal with it. And I think that's just so unfair because there are biological reasons that we can increasingly now understand that explain why some women feel so terribly, for example, during certain parts of their menstrual cycle, or why a woman, when she crosses 40, sometimes feels like things just start to change. She feels different, or she feels like she's gaining weight in places that she doesn't want. And conventionally, what doctors will say is, oh, you just need to relax, take a vacation. Or worse yet, they'll put women into this bucket of you have a mental health issue and they'll give you antidepressants and things like that, which I'm not dismissing the value of those. But the point is, no one's even asking the question, what role could hormones be playing? And I think, as and your audience may know, the decline to hormones actually starts women are in their 30s, right? Like this decline is happening gradually. It's not like you hit 45 and all of a sudden things just drop off. It happens gradually, and there are gradual changes that happen that women experience at different parts of their life. And so that lack of curiosity is, to me, not only suboptimal, but it's also upsetting on many levels, as I'm sure it is for you and your audience. But to come back to your question, the approach that I take really is to first start by understanding their goals, which is how are you feeling now and how would you like to feel? What are the things that you would like to get done that you feel like you can't get done right now? Which seem like very questions, but unfortunately, they're very rarely asked at a conventional doctor's visit. There's this separate agenda that, to be fair, is not the fault of the doctor. It's kind of insurance companies and all these other parties that are involved, and there's things that just need to be done. But we start with that. What do you want to accomplish? Where do you feel like you're not hitting on all cylinders? And from there, we then start to discuss, okay, what sort of things have you tried? What are you willing to try? And from there, we figure out what testing makes sense, and we have the foundation from there of creating a plan for someone.
Yeah. And thank you for that, because so often I've been in a clinician's office where I have been dismissed or prescribed, and you have less than 15 or 20 minutes to actually really dig to the root cause and understand the patient, perhaps some underlying things that are happening in our lives that may be contributing to this, such as menopause or hormonal imbalances. So, with that being said, what are three of some of your most go-to testing environments, or what are three things that you're looking at, particularly with hormonal or aging women in that perimenopause to menopause cycle?
The first thing is we look at certain markers of general health, and in particular, markers of biological processes like inflammation and metabolic function. The reason for this is because really hormones have such a broad ranging set of impacts throughout the body. It's so much more than just regulating your menstrual cycle or even libido or things like that, which people more commonly associate. And during this time, there are these major changes that are happening to hormones, and they play such a pivotal role that it's really crucial that we look at we take a broad purview on the state of the individual. So things like measuring your hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of your ability to process glucose, um, looking at your inflammation levels through a test called C-reactive protein, looking at your cholesterol or lipid levels through a test known as apolipoprotein B or ApoB, which is a new way of looking at cholesterol that is better for many purposes than the lipid panels of old. Those are a first rung. We want to understand where people stand with respect to these foundational of health, because very often they're tied to hormonal transitions. The second thing is to actually look at the hormonal hormones themselves. And so, with respect to that, we're looking at, for women, estrogen and progesterone. And actually, the most useful hormone to look at there is to look at a hormone known as FSH, which is the hormone that your brain releases to signal to the ovaries that it needs more estrogen, so that the body can do its job. And so when that FSH starts to creep up, every individual is different. FSH is really important. We'll often look at estrogen and progesterone levels themselves. And we also look at testosterone. Testosterone is extremely important for women. It gets overlooked a lot. It's also misunderstood. I think a lot of women and clinicians think that as a woman, you want to lower your testosterone as much as possible because it will make you less of a woman, or that it might lead to undesired side effects or factors, acne and that sort of thing. When in fact, testosterone is extremely important for women. It's extremely important for their mood, for your cognitive function, for your metabolism, for libido, just a lot of things that are important for vitality. And testosterone, unlike estrogen and progesterone, actually starts to decline sometimes when women hit their mid 30s. So that's already in decline. And for many women, why they start to feel things like, hey, I'm doing the same exercises as I always was, but suddenly weight is coming on in places that I don't want. Very often, and again, there's many factors that could contribute, but one that I see very commonly is declining testosterone. And testosterone is also something that we look at very closely. By the way, like I'll mention that there are some doctors, especially conventionally trained doctors, who will say measuring these levels makes no sense. There's no evidence for it. And I'm not going to try and pick a fight with anyone. But I think for me, when you just say let's not measure anything, you just lose the ability to learn more about the individual. If you reduce the aperture of information, then you're limited in what you can do. And I think that's why people feel so unsatisfied with their doctors today. They feel like they're just getting this one size fits all rote approach. And that's not, I think we're at a point now where I don't think that's going to cut it for many people. And so you have to be able to handle the information as a clinician to help the patient navigate it. But we do now have the tools and the understanding to do so. Hormones, sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, through FSH, progesterone. I think that's the second tier. And the third tier are other hormones that I think are important to look at. Thyroid in particular for women. Thyroid very often can be out of balance for a variety of reasons. There's a very high, increasingly high prevalence of Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune form of thyroid condition that can lead to low thyroid levels. And thyroid plays a foundational role in the function of the entire body. And I would almost say that if your thyroid isn't in balance, then to some extent it doesn't even matter what you might do to shore up sex hormones. So thyroid is also extremely important to look at. And a lot of women have thyroid deficiencies that kind of lurk beneath the surface for a while because people don't check. So I think those are probably three that I would give you that I think will tell you a lot of information about an individual.
That's great. Thank you. Because I think as women, we're so lost as to how to advocate for these tests and what tests are perhaps the most beneficial in our hormonal health journey and in this longevity, aging, and performance maximization process. I respect Anant, you saying you don't want to fight with any doctor, but here at Hot Flash Health, we do want to fight and we do want to advocate for women to feel heard and seen and optimize their hormonal health. You bring up something interesting in your testing recommendations around hormones, which oftentimes results in hormone replacement therapy. I know for many years, hormone replacement therapy had a bad name associated to it. There's some outdated studies with the negative effects of hormone replacement therapy, but most recently, we're seeing sort of a shift in that dialogue and really seeing more benefits with hormone replacement therapy. Can you speak to that a little bit?
This is probably one of the biggest unfortunate unfoldings in medicine in the last 20 years or perhaps more. And what that has to do with is the deprivation of almost a generation of women from the benefits of hormone replacement therapy. And what this has to do with is the study you alluded to that came out in the early 2000s called the Women's Health Initiative that indicated, at least initially, based on some very, very cursory and it turns out flawed analysis, seemed to indicate that there was a increased risk of breast cancer if for women who took hormone replacement therapy. Now, there are entire podcasts dedicated to really deep diving and unpacking flaws with this study. In fact, there's a book called Estrogen Matters that does an outstanding job talking about this very matter as well as others related to the evidence behind hormone replacement therapy. But the two things I'll mention is that it turns out that, at least based on the most current interpretation, the most updated interpretation, not only does estrogen and hormone replacement therapy not cause breast cancer, but it may even, in fact, be protective. And some of the negative signals we were seeing previously had to do with a variety of factors. One was patient selection, people who are in the hormone replacement therapy group being much older and less healthy. The type of hormones that were being used, which are synthetic and not really that are used today. Things like that, I think, contributed to the initial belief that this was a concern. But even today, I would say at this point, this updated understanding is even starting to reach conventional doctors. I think the adoption, unfortunately, is still too slow. As a longevity practitioner who really believes in hormone replacement therapy, I always have to disclaim what I do by saying this finding is still a black box finding. And so you have to, just to cover your bases, say this exists. And by the way, that's another thing where I wish that we lived in a country that was not so litigious, because I think that a lot of doctors honestly are scared because they're afraid of lawsuits and things like that. And the vast majority of patients are not going to do that. People just want help and they're appreciative and they're grateful for doctors. There's like a small number of things that happen that then end up creating a cascading effect. But the good news is that I think increasingly there are more and more doctors who are willing to step up and do things that can help women. And I think that the evidence base behind this is now at this point pretty robust.
That's great to hear. Debunking the negative impacts of HRT. My understanding is it can be very advantageous to preventative measures cognitively as well. There's more and more studies that are coming out on that, which
Yeah,
is that true?
absolutely. There's emerging data about preventing cognitive decline and Alzheimer's in particular. Very strong data in terms of preventing osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, pretty much all of the major conditions that can afflict a woman as she enters her later years. Hormones are going to be beneficial for. So it really is a foundational part of any wellness oriented regimen. And so I'm glad that this notion that hormones can be beneficial and health promoting is starting to enter the mindset of more physicians. But again, I wish it could happen faster.
Yeah, we're appreciative for physicians like yourself that are really being progressive and mindful in the comprehensive treatment and understanding that personalization to each of your patients. There's so much celebrity news and interest in these longevity clinics. There's a couple really hot terms these days that I'm familiar with, and you and I have had many discussions. One is NAD. That
Mhm.
seems to be one of the most popular celebrity biohacking trends.
Mhm.
For women in particular, there's a lot of curiosity around the benefits of NAD. Can you share with us the top benefits that
Mhm.
NAD is providing, particularly aging women?
Yeah. So let me just first describe what NAD does. So NAD is a molecule that your cells use to help create energy, right? So you have these organelles, which are organs within a cell, right? Like your body's made up of trillions of cells, and each of your cells have organs of their own that are called organelles. And one of these is called the mitochondria, which is like the power plant of the cell. And so NAD is what we call a cofactor, or it's a molecule that participates, it plays a key role in energy production. And we also know from pretty robust science that as people get older, NAD levels decline. And if you just think about the consequences of that, right? Like your entire cell depends on energy to do everything it needs to do. It's almost like electricity, right? So everything a cell needs to do, whether it's grow and divide, clean up after itself, build new proteins, build new components, all of that needs NAD. And so one of the theories that people have is that the gradual loss of NAD is a key driver of the aging process, or like why people just see changes to how they look and feel as they get older. And so the thought process behind NAD therapy is to replace and restore the levels of this energy augmenting molecule, which is, by the way, I think increasingly the way in which we need to understand things. I'll be honest with you, I really spend much more time reading basic scientific journals that are telling us about cellular mechanisms than I do reading these clinical trials and things like that. And I think what that has to do with is just, again, the paradigm shift, right? If I understand mechanisms, I'm better able to personalize care. Clinical trials are designed to just give a binary yes no answer for a population. It doesn't really tell you anything about how something is working. And I think one of the things that I personally believe is that we need to make biology a lot more like other scientific disciplines, right? Like physics, chemistry. And in these disciplines, there's a real focus on mechanisms and how things work and models. And I don't think we arrive at anything great in those disciplines by doing randomized controlled trials or things that are just biostatistical or statistical. But I think we have to focus more on the basics and mechanisms. So anyway, this the cellular paradigm is 100% behind why NAD is so relevant and why so many people are pursuing it as a therapy.
That's great. Thank you, because there's been a lot of talk about it. Similarly, a lot of excitement and dialogue and discussion around peptides.
Yeah, sure. And let me just complete one thought with NAD. So, a lot of people are wondering, I'm sure, what is the evidence behind NAD being beneficial? And what I can say is that we actually have very strong mechanistic and basic data that indicates that NAD is beneficial for a variety of different things. I think where things break down and where some people will say you should not ever do NAD is in the translation to humans. And so when clinical trials have been done, the effects have been modest. And again, like some people would look at that and say, worth it, don't do it. And I think that to me, that's misunderstanding, again, how we need to be thinking about things. Because the other set of information that isn't published anywhere is the tremendous amounts of anecdotal data that we as clinicians have and patients have, seeing tremendous benefits when NAD therapy is given. And I
What
wish we had.
benefits are most patients seeing? Are they seeing cognitive enhancement? I know I have several girlfriends who have tried it and successfully and continue to invest in it for joint pain. I know it's helped that
Yeah,
tremendously. What are the three largest advantages or benefits that you're seeing to patients, or what they're telling you?
NAD can have so many different types of benefits for people. I'll say a few that tend to stand out. One, there's actually a lot of published literature around NAD to improve addiction. There's quite a bit of experience with that, IV NAD for addiction. Um, and then a lot of people who do, especially IV NAD or injectable NAD, improvements to cognitive function, especially in the week or so after you do it. There's also improvements to inflammation that people can sometimes see, and all of the different things and ways in which inflammation can manifest, right? Like joint pains and brain fog, lots of different things. I will say it's also not like a cure all. It's not something that everyone should just run out and do. I think it really has to be considered within the context of an individual, their data, and their overall situation. But overall, I tell you that I myself and many other practitioners have seen tremendous results from NAD, and it is something that is a mainstay of what we will often use as a tool.
That's great to know. And switching gears, similarly, a lot of people are discussing the benefits of peptides, and there's a lot of conversation and dialogue around peptides. Can you share with us a little bit about some of the benefits, particularly as an aging woman?
Peptides are basically, think of them as like small protein based signaling molecules that are there to about affecting cell signaling. And cell signaling is the way in which our cell, it's the language of the cell, right? So when something needs to be carried out in the cell, peptides are what help to send the message. They attach to receptors that are on the surface of the cell, and then a variety of things happen to produce a biological effect. And one of the really remarkable things about peptides is that it's almost like we're using the language of the cell to help it do something that we want it to do. Probably the most well-known example of peptides are GLP-1 receptor agonists. So these are therapies like Ozempic and Wegovy that are well known for their impacts on weight loss, but actually they have tremendous effects outside of weight. We have reductions to inflammation, we have improvements to conditions like high blood pressure, sleep apnea, and so many others. I think we're actually just beginning to scratch the surface only of the benefits of these therapies. A lot of peptides are actually on a kind of drugs that were abandoned by pharmaceutical companies in the therapeutic pipeline. In the hands of clinicians who are using them in this gray market capacity, they can have tremendous benefits. And they can be really powerful tools. But I would say if you choose to go in that direction, you really need to have, number one, a clinician who really knows what they're doing. And number two, you also need to yourself be comfortable with that type of approach, right? Because I think some people, when they see the level of unknown, they get scared.
Been a tremendous paradigm shift in healthcare. And thanks to people like you who have really embraced the leading edge on biomedical science and been more mindful of comprehensive diagnostic testing. So, thank you for that. Are you hopeful that more traditional practices in conventional medicine are going to see a shift in that? I know this is something that you're really an advocate for, and frankly, focus a lot of your business model on, is helping existing practices expand into a longevity based care model, or at least a part of the practice for that. Are you seeing a trend in more of this approach?
Absolutely. So I think that there is just so much interest in this. And I think the really exciting thing is that almost all of it is being driven by patients. This is patient led, not institutionally led. And so a lot of people are trying to step in and support them. Now, most of them today are entrepreneurs, small businesses, people who may have been running things like med spas or concierge clinics, concierge medicine practices, direct primary care, people who are already thinking about a more patient centric approach. They're now looking to include longevity type approaches into what they do. And so that is definitely one type of customer that I'm looking to help out, because I think these are people who already have the orientation, they already have the mindset. And I have a number of tools and ways to work with practices like that. So much of this understanding, not just the science and the medicine, which I've had the opportunity to really understand well, but also understanding how that translates into something that can be delivered in the market. And so some of that is just understanding the business implications of all this, which unfortunately, I wish that wasn't the driving factor. I wish everything was about the medicine and the science, but the reality is it's not, and it's never been that way with any technology. There's countless examples for centuries where, the thing that ultimately determines how something gets out there is really about the storytelling, the marketing, the packaging, as well as the core innovation. And so that is what I hope to bring to people. Certainly people who are running small businesses, clinics, things like that, would love to speak with you. But also, I'm also hearing from even more established, more conventional practices, even health systems in some cases, that are observing what's happening. They see the shift and they want to see how they can get involved as well.
Absolutely. I think knowing your numbers, there's a power in really understanding the numbers and what those interpret to the overall health of your body. And there's a portion of what you're doing that is advocating for patients to understand that. In acknowledging that and understanding a progression in technology, if we've spoken about before, what is your thought process? Hot Flash Health is building out a very powerful AI tool, which we will disclose here shortly. What is your overall perception or thought process, and what is happening with the intersection of medicine and AI?
Yeah. So there's a lot of reasons, as I mentioned, that this is an exciting time to be in medicine, and in particular in this field of medicine. And I think some of that honestly has to do with some of the enabling technologies and generative AI and the ability to use large language models in particular to enhance understanding and enhance our ability to deliver high quality care is just so tremendous. There's many different ways, and I think in which I think AI can be a real unlock for this field in particular, but a few that might just be specific to your audience and what you alluded to is just there's so much data that exists about the experiences women have, but a lot of it is in very unstructured forms, right? There's either in like unstructured clinical notes, or people post about their experiences on forums like Reddit and others. And there's so much unstructured data that until the advent of these models, like we couldn't really do very much with it. But now these models are capable of essentially reading millions, if not tens of millions of data points and putting them all together and helping to create a story can be useful to drive women to more personalized understandings of their own health. So I think it's tremendous. I think it's super interesting, super exciting. And I think people who are combining this very powerful and new technology with the needs of women as it relates to this new and emerging field, I think there's some very exciting and interesting possibilities.
Thank you for that. A couple more questions for you, Dr. Vinjamoori, because you've been such a tremendous resource. I myself, as a 46-year-old woman, and a lot of my peers and a lot of my friends find ourselves in an interesting time in life known as the sandwich time, where we're in the midst of not only caring for our children, but we're caring for our aging parents as well. But for those of us who are concerned about our parents and really wanting them to experience that quality of life at the best possible function that they can, what are some things that you might recommend for aging parents?
Yeah. Honestly, I would say it's never too late. It's never too late to take a different approach to your health and to find a practitioner or to find a place that has this philosophy and to work with them. There's definitely benefit to starting earlier, but it's never too late. So I think that's something I would encourage people to do is if this approach to care does resonate, and if you do want to be more proactive about your approach to health, then find a practitioner who can help you on that journey. I want to help create more of these practitioners. I want to create more of these access points for people because right now it's fairly limited and scarce, unfortunately. And so I see my goal, my entire, reason for doing what I'm doing now is to help unlock that for more people. So I think that would be probably the biggest recommendation is find a practitioner who can help you. And there's so many things that can unfold from that. Now, of course, at the foundation of any being related plan is going to be lifestyle oriented approaches like nutrition, sleep, exercise. I think most people know about these at a high level, but oftentimes you can learn about more specific tweaks that you can make to those that are tailored to you and your own biology and your preferences.
Thank you, because I certainly think there's more people who could benefit from this transformative impact that this approach is bringing to the table. With that being said, if you go to your conventional practitioner, perhaps it's a functional medicine doctor, whoever it may be, what are three things that we as patients should really advocate for? Is there a number of tests that we should insist upon? Is there markers that we need to have a better understanding? How can we advocate for what it is that you're doing aside from encourage our conventional physicians or our med spa to bring in someone like you to expand their line of practice?
Honestly, the more patients come to their practitioners, bring to them these questions, the more that this transition will happen slowly. But I think it comes to have pushing in every visit to talk about your goals, right? It's so, again, it seems so obvious, but it happens so infrequently, right? To have in the next visit that you go to, for example, think about what are some goals you have for your health, right? Whether it's I want to sleep better, I want to feel more energy, I want to think clearer, and present that goal to your doctor and be deliberate about it. Say, hey, I'm here today and I want to talk about this particular goal. Now, things may unfold in any number of different ways. I think a lot of doctors may, unfortunately, not really be very well equipped to answer or speak to that. But at least you've planted the seed by doing that. You've planted the seed that, like, hey, this matters to you, and I expect this from you. And some practitioners will in turn, and there's a lot of wonderful doctors out there who just don't know. They're just not, it's so hard to poke your head above water when running a practice in is just so exhausting. I think most physicians take the approach that they do, not because they're like willingly dismissing this, but because they just don't have the time. They're not exposed to this other approach. And it's just, but if you as a patient kind of push your practitioner, nudge them in that direction, I would venture to guess that a good number of them will say, okay, I don't know that much about this, but I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to do some research and come back to you. Then my hope is that they would then start to do research and find resource. Unfortunately, there aren't great resources for clinicians, but that's something else that we're also working on improving. But they would find resources and they would themselves get turned on to this new approach. And that's another way that in which we can make this type of medicine more available to people.
That's an interesting shift in mindset. I think we as patients always go to doctors wanting them to find an issue or wanting them to set those goals for us. Actually taking things into your own hands and setting your goals and then creating a storyboard of, hey, I would like to find solutions to this. What are your recommendations? That's really shifting the mindset, but I
Yeah.
think very beneficial.
Yeah.
So thank you. Speaking of seeing physicians and advocating for ourselves, how often, particularly as females, is it recommended to get a comprehensive blood work panel on an annual basis?
It really depends on the individual. For many people, I would say doing it once a year can be beneficial to really understand like where you are, and just a lot can change in a year. So doing things once a year can be just a nice natural cadence. Now again, it's really going to, this is again why it's so important to work with a good practitioner, because they can personalize an approach for you and help come up with a approach diagnostically that makes sense for you and your needs. Sometimes it might be more frequent. There might be specific things that you want to follow up at a more frequent cadence. And so I come back to find a really knowledgeable person to work with.
Great. If only there were more people like you, Dr. Anant Benjamori. I am so grateful that our paths crossed. You've been a tremendous resource and advocate for this type of progressive performance-based longevity medicine that absolutely more clinicians, more practices, more lifestyle-oriented mindsets need to embrace the type of technology and really the comprehensive care that this is offering. And I know that's something that you do, and anyone who's seeking that service would be so blessed to have you in their corner.
Yeah, if anyone is interested, feel free to shoot me a DM on my Instagram. That's probably the best way for that. And then certainly anyone who is running a practice or running a business and looking to get into longevity, I really want to speak with you and work with you as well. And so if you go to my website, dranant.com, there's a way that you can book a discovery call with me.
Again, so thankful to have met you, and so thankful for what you're doing for the many patients that you've seen and had a transformative impact on their lives, but the education that you're putting out there and really encouraging other practitioners and lifestyle businesses and practices to embrace this type of care. I have no doubt there will be many more big things for you. I know you've been on a tremendous number of speaking engagements and are very well respected in the community and certainly making your mark. So for that, we are so thankful, and so thankful for you advocating for women who are on this hormonal health journey and really wanting and needing and deserving to be seen. So we appreciate that for what we're doing here at Hot Flash Health. So thank you so much, Anant. It was a pleasure to spend my Friday afternoon with you, and we appreciate everything that you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dawn.